So I shot this video almost a year ago, but I shelved it because I had second thoughts about posting such a long video. But I know now that there is a small but highly motivated core group of you that really want to learn from highly detailed step-by-step videos. Plus, I really enjoy making this kind of video. So, hey, sorry YouTube algorithm, I'm going to post a long educational video. And hey, if you enjoy this approach to learning, please consider checking out my online course, The Weekend Woodworker, where I'll take you in-depth, step-by-step through the process of creating beautiful furniture for your home. There's no experience necessary. In fact, you can build your very first woodworking project this weekend, just like thousands of other people have already done. To see all the tools you'll need for the course, head over to mytoollist.com and download my free guide to setting up a woodworking shop for under $1,000. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this lost project, the folding sawhorse project. All you need are just a few handheld power tools to make it, and you can download free plans down in the description. I'll start the sawhorses by cutting out 4 legs for each sawhorse using 2x4 lumber. A word on 2x4s. When you go to the home center to find 2x4s, make sure you get the driest boards you can find. They'll be labeled kiln dried or just KD. Don't get the ones labeled green. Those are going to be still really wet. It's like working with a tree. You'll know by the weight of those, they're much heavier, and when they dry, they're going to start to warp and change position, and it just brings on a whole world of problems that you don't want to deal with. Here you can see this board is labeled KD kiln dried and HT for heat treated. It's not a race at the home center. Don't be in a rush to just pick out any 2x4 you can. Take the time to sight down the edges to find ones that aren't twisted or warped or bent in one direction or another. Get the straightest boards that you can. All of the cuts for the 2x4 legs are going to be beveled at 22.5 degrees. Of course, that's half of 45 degrees. It's a very common bevel to make. Most circular saws will have a positive stop at 22.5 degrees, and it's usually marked, and all saws will have a scale of some sort. If your saw doesn't have that positive stop, just try to set it as close to 22.5 degrees as you can. These don't have to be exact. I'll make my first cut by chopping off a little bit of the end of this board. First, I need to set the depth of my saw. I want it to cut just slightly deeper than the thickness of the 2x4. Once you've got the bevel and the depth of your saw set, don't forget to wear your safety glasses and hearing protection. I'm going to use my speed square to help me get a straight cut. You might need to manually retract your blade guard before starting the cut. Now I can measure over the length of the legs. In my case, I'm going 29 3/8 of an inch. Those are the lengths that are in the plans. But if you want your sawhorses to be a little bit higher, by all means change the length of the legs. These 2 notches on the circular saw give me a guide to follow along a line. This one is for making 90 degrees straight cross cuts, and this one is what I follow for 45 degree angles. And since this is halfway between that, I need to move the saw over so where it's cutting down the center of this to get an accurate cut. Now I can use that first piece as a measuring stick for the rest of the cut. So I'll just flip it around this way and line up the 2 ends. Then I can make a mark on this side. And for consistency, I want to use this same board to measure each piece, so I'll just mark it. When you're using a speed square as a guide for your saw, use this little cleat on one end and just hold it tightly against the board. So when you get near the end of the board, there probably won't be enough space for you to work like this, so you need to work on the other side. But I can still use my same measuring stick. I'll just flip it around and use that inside bevel. Now I can flip it around this way and have plenty of room to support the saw. With those all cut, if you want, you can line them up and make sure that you got them all to the same length. You might be a little bit off, you know, if you're a 1/16th or an 1/8 of an inch longer on some of these, it doesn't really matter. Don't try to even them up at this point. If you find out that it's a problem once they're assembled, you can easily just remove a little bit off of the bottoms of the legs. But really, they're sawhorses. You don't have to be that exact. Before I hinge these legs together, I need to snip off a little wedge on one end of each leg so that the hinge will work properly and not interfere with the top of the sawhorse. I'm gonna draw a line about 1/8 of an inch. That'd be about 3 millimeters from the end of the board. Like that. Doesn't have to be exact. I'm not even measuring it. I'm just kind of eyeballing about how much that would be. I've set the base of my saw back to a 0-degree bevel, and I'll just cut straight across. So here's what you're looking for. You've got that original bevel we made there, and then this additional flat side there. I want to show you why snipping off those ends a little bit is important for this to swing open. So here's two boards where I haven't cut those little ends off, and if I put them down flat like this, I'll just hold this hinge into place so that you can see how this would work. The problem is that these go beyond 90 degrees, which would kind of be what a normal hinge would be used for. But in this case, if I hold this together and go all the way down like this, the hinge sticks up a little bit above the tops. Again, you only have to do this on one end of each leg. It's going to be a lot easier to use your pocket hole jig if you attach it to any kind of scrap piece of wood just to give it some stability. I'm using a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. 2 1.25 screws will be plenty to hold this in place. I'll adjust this depth guide to 1.5 inches. That's the thickness of a 2x4. When using 2.5 inch pocket screws, you'll need to use the little setup guide to adjust the collar on the drill bit. Once I got it set, I like to back it off a little bit more. This will prevent the screw from driving all the way through the 2x4. To drill these holes, I'll drop the end with the 2 bevels down this way so that the large bevel is going toward the back. And I'll drill 2 holes. After drilling all those pocket holes, I realized that I only need the pocket holes on 2 of the legs for each of the sawhorses. So I've just got an extra pair on these. Doesn't really matter, I just won't use them. Now to attach these hinges, I'm gonna butt the 2 ends with those multiple bevels up together. Then I'll line up this knuckle of my strap hinge right down the center of that connection. I'm just going to hold it in place while I drill the holes. You might want to tape it down so that it doesn't move around. I'll drive a couple of 1¼ inch screws into those holes. I like to use these self-centering drill bits. They've got a little spring-loaded part here that centers into those holes of hinges. You don't have to use one of these. You could use an awl to kind of eyeball the center and get yourself a little starting point, or even a nail. Or you could just wing it and drive the screw directly in there. Having both a drill and an impact driver makes this process a lot faster. These are gonna feel real loosey-goosey, but don't worry about it. We'll put in the cross braces that will help stabilize these. I'll cut out 2 cross braces, 1 for each sawhorse out of this 1x2 board. Now I'll use my pocket hole jig again to drill 2 holes on the ends of each of these braces. I'll adjust this depth gauge down to 3/4 inch this time. That's the thickness of the 1x2. And I've adjusted the collar on this drill bit down so that the tip almost touches the base, but not quite. This time I'll line up the board so I'm using these 2 holes that are real close together. I'll attach that to one of the legs, the leg that has the pocket holes in it. In my case, I did them on both legs, but just make sure that you do it on the side with the pocket holes. In other words, one of your legs should have the holes here, not on this one. I did them on both. So you could do them on both legs, it won't really matter. It's just that these we're not gonna use. So ideally, this cross brace will be tipped so that it's aligned with the top of that bevel. There's no real good way to clamp this and hold it in place, so I'm just gonna try to hold it even with that bevel as best as I can while I drive 1/4 inch screws. When you're using pocket screws to attach boards that are different sizes like these, always use the size screw that goes into the smaller board. That's usually the one that goes into the bigger board, so that's why I'm using the smaller screws on this. So pretty good job there. You can see the reason why I wanted that flat with the tops of these was just to give more support for the 2x4 that'll sit on the top. I also want to point out that this screw caused a little bit of this 2x4 to split right there. If I wanted to fix that, I could just drop some glue in there and clamp this together, but again, it doesn't really matter because this is a sawhorse and it's still gonna be sturdy enough, especially once I put the top on. I'll cut 2 tops out of this 2x4. They could be whatever length you want. I'm gonna make mine 42 inches long. Having a helper for this part would be very helpful, but you can do this alone. You just have to grab all of these legs, trying not to let one leg fall or it might split that top. Then drop it down. Try to center it as best as you can. You'll feel it, once it starts to grab, it'll hold a lot better. And then I'll quickly do this side before it all falls apart. I'm gonna give this a little bit of added support by drilling a screw into the center of this cross brace. So it's pretty sturdy, just like this, but I would still be careful with these front folding legs until you get that shelf installed, because that's gonna give it a lot more support. Well, good morning. It looks like it's gonna be a beautiful day out. I had to wrap it up a little bit early yesterday because it was starting to rain. And so I pulled the Sawhorses inside and I thought, you know, I'll just wait until today, to finish these up rather than try to rush through those and work inside of my garage. And it really kind of brings home a point I wanted to make about woodworking in general. And this is, I think, one of the most important things to always keep in mind on your woodworking journey is that it should be fun. You should always keep that in mind, that you're here just to enjoy the process and to build really cool things, and never push yourself beyond what feels fun and comfortable just because you want to get the project done. If you do that, you're going to start making mistakes. You could actually lead to injuries. It's best just to step back, leave the project alone, and come back the next day. Now let's finish these things up. I'm cutting out 2 leg braces for each of the Sawhorses using this 1x2 lumber. And you'll need to cut those to a custom length depending on your Sawhorse. They're all gonna be a little bit different. The best way to do this is to just open it up as wide as it'll go, and then take a measurement from the bottom of the leg and make a mark halfway up. Then with that center point marked, measure the distance between the edge of this leg and the edge of this leg. Once you have that distance and you've cut the board down, you can kind of test it by imagining the pivot spot here and holding it in place. And then just see how much clearance you have. Make sure that your board's not so long that it's gonna hit the top or hit the ground. Hey, I can actually use the Sawhorse now. I wanna cut out a little rounded area on the end of each of these boards. It's mostly decorative. I think it just looks a little nicer without those sharp edges. Ideally, you can just find something that has the same diameter as the width of your board. This is the little vacuum attachment that goes to my pocket hole jig, so I'll use that. I'll use my jigsaw to cut out those curves. And if you really wanted to make it nice and that jagged edge bothers you, sand it down nice and smooth. I'm using 120 grit sandpaper in my random orbit sander. For this other Sawhorse, I could just use these as a template and trace out the pattern, cut it with my jigsaw. I don't even have to worry about the circular saw. And make sure you find the good sections of a board. This board here has a knot right here, and this will just fall out and become a weak spot. So this will all be just waste here, and so I'll make the next cuts over here. And I didn't use this end because it's kind of icky too. So I want to measure over 3/4 of an inch from the end of these cross pieces and make a mark and drill a 1/4 inch hole. I'll drill both pairs at the same time by lining them up and holding it in place. Mostly you want to make sure that you're drilling straight as you can through there. Make sure that the drill isn't tipped one way or the other. I'll drill a hole into the midpoint of these legs where I marked them before. And I'll do that on all 4 legs. I need to cut out a notch on one end of each of these boards, so I'll just draw a line from the edge of that hole down, like that, and I'll cut it out with my jigsaw. So it should be big enough that the 1/4 inch bolt will drop down into. Looks like I need to make it a little wider. That'll work. I'll attach one side with a lag screw and a washer. The only thing to keep in mind here is which legs those go on. This side here is the attached side, the side that's attached to the top. So you want the side with the hinged part to go on the hinged legs. I'll drive these in using my impact driver and a hex driver bit. You could also use a wrench. You just want to make sure you don't drive it in so tight that it won't swing. That feels good. This side gets the lag screw only, no washer. And just make sure that you don't drive it all the way in. It needs to stick out so that this will swing down, and it went too far. Drop into place. You'll instantly notice how much more stability that gives these. I'm using 1/2 inch thick plywood for the shelves. I'll just cut those down to size. I'll use this piece of plywood to draw a straight line. And I'll just screw this onto those braces. I'll drill pilot holes first. It's a little bit of a tight squeeze, but you can put these in at an angle if you need to.